It was slurping, like being vacuumed by a myth. Jax Bradley's voice echoed through the sterile corridors of the Thorellan Research Complex. As he burst through the laboratory doors, his face flushed crimson, and his hands frantically adjusting his shirt. Behind him through the reinforced glass, a figure watched with what could only be described as scientific curiosity mixed with disappointment. But let's back up 12 hours to when this whole mess started in the floating city of Port Calexis. Picture this. You're suspended 3 miles above the surface of Andoros, a gas giant, where the air tastes like cinnamon and electricity, and the gravity feels like you're swimming through honey. The city itself is a marvel of engineering crystalline spires connected by bridges that seem to defy physics, all of it held aloft by anti-gravity generators that hum a constant, almost musical note. Jax had been here for 3 days finishing up what should have been a routine cargo run. Gene samples mostly, nothing fancy. The kind of job that pays well enough to keep his ship fueled and his stomach full, but boring enough that he'd started counting the geometric patterns in the city's architecture just to stay awake. That's when he met her. Dr. Serana was what the locals called a knowledge seeker of the highest order, though Jax would later learn that was academic speak for brilliant researcher who probably knew more about biological systems than entire universities back on Earth. She stood about 6 feet tall with skin that shifted between deep blue and violet depending on the light, and these eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies worth of secrets. She'd approached him at the intergalactic commerce hub where Jax was nursing his third cup of something that tasted like coffee, but probably wasn't. Most aliens gave humans a wide berth in places like this. We have a reputation, you see. Not necessarily a bad one, but intense, unpredictable. The kind of species that might accidentally start a trade war over a misunderstood gesture. But Serana walked right up to his table and said, "You're the human pilot everyone's been talking about." Jax looked up from his not coffee. "Depends what they're saying." "That you have an unusual tolerance for biochemical adaptation trials." Her voice had this melodic quality, like she was constantly on the verge of singing. "I'm conducting research on cross-species physiological compatibility, and I need a test subject who won't, how do you humans say it, freak out?" Now, any reasonable person would have asked follow-up questions. What kind of trials? What did compatibility mean exactly? What were the risks? But Jax had been doing cargo runs for 8 months straight, and the prospect of doing something anything different was too tempting to resist. "Define freak out," he said. Serana's expression brightened, and that's when Jax noticed the small device attached to her left temple. It looked organic, like a flower made of silver and crystal, and it was pulsing with a very faint red light. "Oh, that's just my research monitor," she said, catching his stare. "It tracks biochemical responses during experiments. Completely harmless." Jax would later realize that this was the exact moment his life took a turn toward the absolutely insane. Because what he didn't know, what nobody had bothered to explain, was that in Thorellan culture, that red pulsing light meant something very specific. It meant she had selected a potential mate. And by agreeing to her research proposal by saying, "Sure, why not? What's the worst that could happen?" Jax had just accepted the biological equivalent of a marriage proposal. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. At that moment, sitting in the commerce hub with artificial sunsets streaming through the city's atmospheric barriers, Jax just thought he'd found an interesting way to make some extra credits and maybe learn something about alien biology. Serana explained that the procedure would involve sensory interface testing and biochemical resonance mapping, scientific terms that sounded impressive and vaguely harmless. She led him through the winding corridors of the research complex, past laboratories filled with equipment that hummed and chirped and occasionally made sounds like whale songs. "The process is quite simple," she said as they entered a room that looked like a cross between a medical facility and something out of a very expensive spa. "We establish a baseline connection through tactile interface, then gradually increase the depth of biochemical exchange." Jax settled onto what appeared to be an examination table, though it adjusted to his body temperature and pulse, in ways that suggested it was considerably more advanced than anything he'd seen in human medicine. "Biochemical exchange," he repeated. "That sounds intimate, yes." Serana moved around the room, activating various devices with gestures that were almost dance-like. Many species find the process quite pleasurable, though humans, I'm told, can have unexpected reactions. The device on her temple was pulsing faster now, and Jax noticed that her skin had taken on a slightly luminescent quality. Beautiful, actually. Almost hypnotic. "So what exactly happens during this exchange?" he asked. Serana paused in her preparations and looked at him with those galaxy-deep eyes. "I make contact with your nervous system through specialized biological interfaces. Think of it as a very thorough handshake." That should have been his cue to ask more questions. But the room had filled with a subtle, pleasant scent, and Serana's movements had taken on an almost ceremonial quality that was oddly relaxing. "Ready?" she asked. Jax nodded, and that's when everything went sideways. The moment Serana placed her hand on his arm, Jax felt something unlike anything in his previous experience. It started as warmth, then became pressure, then became something that his brain could only interpret as suction. Not painful exactly, but intensely surprising, like being drawn into something vast and welcoming and absolutely alien. His nervous system lit up like a Christmas tree. Every nerve ending suddenly became hyper-aware, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he could swear he heard something that sounded like cosmic wind chimes. Then came the slurping. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a sensation that his brain translated into sound because it didn't have any other reference point. Like being gently but irresistibly pulled into something that was trying to taste his entire existence. And that's when Jax did what any reasonable human would do when faced with the unknown and slightly terrifying. He panicked. "Nope!" he shouted, pulling away so suddenly that he nearly fell off the examination table. "Nope, nope, absolutely not!" Serana blinked, her hand still extended, the device on her temple, now pulsing in rapid, almost frantic patterns. "But we haven't finished the initial sequence," she said, sounding genuinely confused. "That was slurping," Jax protested, backing toward the door. "There was definitely slurping involved. That's just the neural interface establishing connection," Serana explained, taking a step toward him. "It's perfectly normal. The sensation indicates successful biochemical compatibility." But Jax was already at the door, his fight-or-flight response in full control. It was like being vacuumed by a myth. "I'm out." Echo. And with that, he bolted. What Jax didn't know as he ran through the corridors of the research complex was that he had just done something unprecedented in Thorellan culture. He had initiated the flight of acceptance, a traditional response that indicated overwhelming emotional approval of a mating proposal. The red light on Serana's temple device flashed 3 times and then shifted to a steady golden glow. Somewhere in the city's central computer systems, an automated message was being filed with the Interspecies Relations Bureau, formally registering the first human Thorellan bonding ceremony in recorded history. And Jax Bradley, cargo pilot and accidental pioneer of interstellar romance, had absolutely no idea what he'd just gotten himself into. Now, to understand how Jax Bradley ended up accidentally married to an alien scientist, we need to rewind a bit and talk about why he was on Andros in the first place. 3 weeks earlier, Jax had landed his cargo ship, the Wandering Star, at Port Calexis, with a hold full of genetic samples destined for Thorellan labs. Not the most glamorous cargo, but it paid well enough. The Thorellans were obsessed with biological diversity, always looking for new genetic material to study, and Earth's chaotic evolutionary history made human samples particularly valuable. The delivery had gone smoothly. Too smoothly, actually. Jax was used to bureaucratic nightmares, customs delays, and at least one attempt at bribery per job. But the Thorellans had processed his cargo with an efficiency that was almost unsettling. Payment transferred paperwork, filed samples, cataloged, and shipped off to wherever they do their mysterious science, which left Jax with 3 days to kill before his next job, and absolutely nothing to do in a city that was apparently designed by mathematicians who'd taken too much inspiration from crystal formations. That's how he ended up at the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Conference, mostly because the hospitality suite had free food and what passed for alcohol on this part of the galaxy. The conference was exactly as boring as it sounded. Diplomats from 70 different species talking about trade agreements and cultural sensitivity protocols while carefully avoiding anything that might actually be interesting. Jax was working on his fourth glass of something purple and mildly hallucinogenic when he noticed her watching him. Dr. Serana wasn't hard to spot in a crowd. Even among the exotic mix of aliens attending the conference, she stood out. Part of it was her height. Part of it was the way her skin seemed to shimmer with its own light. But mostly it was the intensity of her focus. She was studying him the way a scientist might study a particularly fascinating specimen, which, as it turned out, was exactly what she was doing. "You're the human pilot," she said when she finally approached his table. It wasn't a question. "Guilty as charged," Jax replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Though I'm pretty sure I'm not the only human in the sector." "No, but you're the only one who delivered samples to my lab." Serana settled into the chair with a fluid grace that made it look like she was floating. "I've been tracking your cargo runs for the past 6 months. Very impressive tolerance for unconventional assignments." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You've been tracking me. Professional interest only." She assured him, though there was something in her expression that suggested otherwise. "Your psychological profile indicates an unusual openness to new experiences. Plus, according to your shipping manifest, you've successfully completed runs to 7 different hostile environments without filing a single complaint or insurance claim. I like to think of myself as adaptable." Jack said, not entirely sure whether he should be flattered or concerned that an alien scientist had apparently compiled a dossier on him. "Adaptable," Serana repeated as if testing the word. "Yes, that's exactly what I need." The device on her temple pulsed once briefly, and Jax caught a glimpse of what looked like data streaming across its surface in symbols he couldn't read. "What kind of research are you doing exactly?" he asked. Serana's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that usually meant someone was about to explain their life's work in excruciating detail. "Cross-species physiological compatibility studies. I'm investigating how different nervous systems respond to biochemical interface protocols." "That sounds complicated." "Not at all," she said, waving dismissively. "Think of it as sophisticated matchmaking. I'm trying to determine which species might be capable of forming deeper biological connections with each other." The way she said deeper biological connections made something in Jax's stomach do a small flip. "And you think humans might be compatible with Thorellans specifically?" Serana leaned forward and Jax caught a subtle scent like ozone in flowers. "Your species has several physiological traits that suggest you might be uniquely suited for our bonding processes." "Bonding processes," Jax repeated slowly. "It's really quite fascinating." Serana continued, apparently missing the slightly panicked edge in his voice. "Most species have very rigid biological protocols for forming intimate connections. But humans seem to have this remarkable flexibility, this ability to adapt to almost any stimulus pattern." She paused, studying his face with those impossibly deep eyes. "I chose you specifically because my research indicated that you have a tendency toward what your species calls flight response when faced with overwhelming stimuli." "You chose me because I run away from things." "Because you run toward them first," she corrected. "Your psychological profile shows a consistent pattern of initial engagement, followed by strategic retreat when situations become too intense. It's exactly what I need for my research." Jax wasn't entirely sure how to feel about being psychologically profiled by an alien scientist who apparently found his tendency to panic and flee from uncomfortable situations to be professionally attractive. "What exactly would this research involve?" he asked. "Sensory interface testing?" Serana said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I would establish a biochemical connection with your nervous system to study how human neural pathways respond to Thorellan bonding stimuli." "Biochemical connection," Jax said. "Think of it as an extremely intimate form of communication. I would use specialized biological interfaces to link our nervous systems temporarily, allowing me to study the compatibility patterns between our species." She made it sound almost clinical, but there was something in her voice, a slight breathiness, that suggested the process might be considerably less scientific than she was letting on. "Is it safe?" Jax asked. "Completely," Serana assured him. "Though I should mention that the sensation can be quite intense for species that aren't accustomed to direct neural interface." Some test subjects have described it as overwhelming. Out of overwhelming how, well, Serana said her skin taking on a slightly more vibrant hue. The neural connection creates a sensation of deep unity, as if your consciousness is being gently drawn into something larger than yourself. Most find it quite pleasurable once they adjust to the initial intensity. The device on her temple was pulsing more rapidly now, and Jax noticed that other conference attendees were starting to stare in their direction. Apparently, whatever Serana was broadcasting was getting attention. The process itself is quite simple. She continued, I would make physical contact with your nervous system through specialized biological interfaces, gradually increasing the depth of connection until we achieve full biochemical resonance. And then what happens? Then we observe the compatibility patterns and document the results. Serana paused, tilting her head slightly. Though I should mention that successful resonance between species that have never bonded before can have some unexpected side effects. What kind of side effects? Nothing dangerous, she said quickly. Just some temporary biochemical changes. Enhanced empathy, increased sensory sensitivity, occasionally some mild telepathic resonance. Jax stared at her. Telepathic resonance. Very mild, Serana emphasized, and completely temporary. Usually, there was a moment of silence as Jax processed this information. On one hand, the whole thing sounded like exactly the kind of poorly thought-out decision that had gotten him into trouble countless times before. On the other hand, he'd been hauling cargo through empty space for months, and the prospect of doing something genuinely interesting was almost irresistible. Plus, there was something about Serana herself that he found fascinating. Not just her exotic beauty, though, that was certainly a factor, but the way she looked at him like he was a puzzle she was genuinely excited to solve. Where would this research take place? He asked. My private laboratory in the research complex, Serana said. Complete privacy, comfortable environment, all necessary safety protocols in place. And this would help with your compatibility research. Immensely. Human neural patterns are unlike anything in our databases. If the process works with your species, it could revolutionize how we understand interspecies bonding. Jax looked around the conference room at the endless sea of diplomats discussing trade regulations and cultural exchange protocols with all the passion of people reading instruction manuals, then back at Serana, whose eyes held the promise of something genuinely extraordinary. What the hell, he said. Let's do it. Did a device on Serana's temple flash 3 times in rapid succession, and her smile could have powered the city's atmospheric generators. What Jax didn't know as he followed her through the corridors of the research complex was that he had just agreed to participate in what was essentially the Thorellan equivalent of a honeymoon suite trial run. And what Serana didn't know was that humans had a completely different understanding of the phrase biochemical compatibility testing than what she was planning to demonstrate. But they were both about to find out. So there was Jax sprinting through the corridors of the Thorellan research complex like his life depended on it, leaving behind a very confused alien scientist and what he was pretty sure had been the beginning of some kind of biological horror movie. He didn't stop running until he reached his ship, where he immediately locked the airlock, activated the security protocols, and poured himself the largest drink his emergency stash could provide. His hands were still shaking from whatever the hell had just happened in that laboratory. Okay, he said to his empty cabin. Note to self, no more volunteering for alien science experiments. Ever. The device on his wrist chirped with an incoming call. Tavik's face appeared on the small screen. His green features twisted into what passed for concern among his species. Jax, buddy, please tell me you didn't just do what my sensors are saying you did, Tavik said without preamble. Tavik was a Zalani trader who'd become something like Jax's best friend over the past few years, mostly because he had an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time with useful information and questionable advice. I don't know what your sensors are saying, Jax replied, taking a swig of his drink, but I probably did it. According to the Planetary Communication Network, a human just participated in a Thorellan bonding ceremony and then performed the traditional flight of acceptance. Jax nearly choked on his drink. Flight of what now? Oh no, Tavik said, his expression shifting to something that looked like panic. Oh no, no, no. Jax, please tell me you didn't run away from a Thorellan female after she initiated intimate contact. I ran away from a Thorellan female after she tried to vacuum my nervous system through some kind of biological interface, Jax said. Why, what's wrong with that? Tvek put his head in his hands. Jax, you absolute idiot. In Thorellan culture, running away after intimate contact is how you accept a mating proposal. The drink slipped from Jax's fingers and crashed to the floor. What? The flight of acceptance. Tvek explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining something very obvious to someone very stupid. It's their most sacred bonding ritual. When a Thorellan female initiates intimate contact and the male flees in overwhelming emotional response, it signifies that the connection is so powerful he cannot contain his acceptance of the bond. But I was running away because I was terrified, which to a Thorellan is the same thing as being overwhelmed by passionate acceptance, Tvek said. They don't distinguish between fear and excitement in their bonding protocols. Both indicate successful biochemical compatibility. Jax stared at his friend's image on the screen. Are you telling me that I just accidentally got engaged to an alien scientist? Worse than that, Tvek said grimly. According to the planetary legal database, you just got married. The words hit Jax like a physical blow. Married? How is that possible? I was only in that lab for like 10 minutes. Thorellan bonding ceremonies are considered legally binding the moment both parties participate in the ritual, Tvek explained. The female initiates contact. The male accepts through flight response and boom. Instant marriage under Andros planetary law. Jax sat down heavily on his bunk. This is insane. There has to be some kind of mistake. Some way to undo this. Well, Tvek said slowly, there is one way. If the bonding hasn't been consummated within 72 hours, either party can file for dissolution. But Jax, you need to understand something. In Thorellan culture, refusing to complete the bonding ceremony after accepting the initial ritual is considered the ultimate insult. It's like declaring that the female is unworthy of your genetic material. But I don't want to insult anyone, Jax protested. I just want to pretend this whole thing never happened. Too late for that, Tvek said. According to the public records, your marriage was automatically registered with the Interspecies Relations Bureau 15 minutes ago. It's already been filed with Earth's colonial administration. Congratulations, by the way. You're now the first human in recorded history to marry a Thorellan. Jax put his head in his hands. This is a nightmare. It gets worse, Tvek continued cheerfully. Dr. Serana Vethiki is apparently quite prominent in Thorellan scientific circles. Your marriage just became intersystem news. I'm looking at 3 different news feeds right now covering the historic first bonding between human and Thorellan species. I'm going to throw up, Jax muttered. Also, Tvek added, and this is the really important part, she's currently on her way to your ship. Jax's head snapped up. What? According to Thorellan tradition, after the flight of acceptance, the female has the right to pursue her new mate to his dwelling to complete the bonding ceremony. She should be arriving at your docking bay in about 10 minutes. Can I leave? Can I just take off and pretend this never happened? Not unless you want to be charged with abandonment of a legal spouse under planetary law, Tvek said. Plus, leaving without completing the ceremony would cause a massive diplomatic incident. You'd probably start an interspecies war. As if on cue, Jax's ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message. The main screen activated, showing Serana's face. She looked composed, professional, and absolutely beautiful. She also looked determined. Jax Bradley, she said, her melodic voice filling the cabin, I am formally requesting permission to board your vessel to discuss the completion of our bonding ceremony. Jax stared at the screen in horror. She wants to complete the ceremony. Of course she does, Tvek said. You just accepted her mating proposal in front of her entire research community. From her perspective, you're her husband now, and she has every right to expect you to fulfill your matrimonial obligations. What kind of obligations? Jax asked, though he was pretty sure he didn't want to know the answer. Well, Tvek said delicately, Thorellan bonding ceremonies typically involve extended periods of intimate biochemical exchange. Think of it as a very intensive honeymoon that could last anywhere from several hours to several weeks, depending on compatibility levels. The communication system chimed again. Nyari Jax. Serana's voice came through the speakers. I understand that the intensity of our initial connection may have been overwhelming. It's perfectly normal for newly bonded males to experience confusion and disorientation. I'm here to help you through the adjustment process. She thinks I'm confused and disoriented, Jack said weakly. Aren't you? Tavik asked. That's not the point. The communication system chimed a third time. Jax, I'm activating my legal authority as your bonded mate to override your ship's docking protocols. I'm coming aboard. The ship's main computer immediately responded, docking override accepted, spousal access granted under Andaro's planetary marriage code, section 7.3. Your ship just let her in, Tavik observed unnecessarily. Jax could hear the airlock cycling. In about 30 seconds, his accidental alien wife was going to walk into his cabin and expect him to participate in what sounded like the most intense biological experience of his life. Tavik, he said desperately, what am I supposed to do? Well, his friend replied thoughtfully, you could try explaining that it was all a misunderstanding, or you could run away again, which would probably just convince her that you're even more overwhelmed by passionate acceptance than she initially thought. The inner airlock door hissed open. Or, Tavik added helpfully, you could go with it and see what happens. I mean, how bad could it be? Dr. Serana Vethke stepped into Jax's cabin, and the first thing he noticed was that she had changed clothes. Instead of her practical research attire, she was now wearing something that looked like it had been woven from starlight and good intentions. The device on her temple was pulsing with a warm golden light, and her skin had taken on an almost luminescent quality. Hello, husband, she said with a smile that could have melted steel. Hello, husband, Serana said, and those two words hit Jax like a freight train carrying a load of pure confusion. There she stood in his cabin, looking like something out of a dream calling him husband, and every rational thought in his head was screaming in about 12 different directions at once. Part of him wanted to run again. Part of him wanted to demand an explanation, and a very inconvenient part of him was noting that she looked absolutely stunning in whatever that starlight dress was supposed to be. Okay, Jack said, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. Before we go any further with this whole husband and wife thing, I think we need to talk. Serana tilted her head, and the device on her temple pulsed with what looked like curiosity patterns. Of course, the bonding conversation is a traditional part of the ceremony. I should have anticipated that human males would require verbal processing before physical completion. Physical completion, Jack squeaked. The consummation of our bond, Serana explained patiently. The biochemical integration that will make our marriage permanent and complete. Jack sat down on his bunk before his legs gave out entirely. Serana, I think there's been a massive misunderstanding here. How so? I didn't know I was accepting a marriage proposal, he said. I thought I was volunteering for a scientific experiment. When I ran away, it wasn't because I was overwhelmed by passionate acceptance. It was because I was terrified of being biochemically vacuumed by an alien. Serana's expression shifted to something that might have been disappointment, though it was hard to tell with someone whose facial expressions operated on completely different principles than human ones. You didn't intend to accept my bonding proposal, she asked quietly. I didn't even know it was a bonding proposal, Jack said. In human culture, when someone suggests biochemical compatibility testing, we assume they mean, actual science, not marriage. The light on Serana's temple device dimmed considerably, and for a moment she looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. I see, she said. So you wish to dissolve the bond. And that's when Jax realized that this whole situation was considerably more complicated than he'd initially thought. Because looking at Serana standing there in his cabin, her luminescent skin dimming with what was clearly disappointment, he found himself actually considering what it might be like to be married to an alien scientist. It's not that simple, he said carefully. I mean, yes, I was surprised, and yes, I panicked, but I don't necessarily want to hurt you or cause problems. The dissolution would cause significant problems, Serana admitted, settling onto the edge of his desk. I should have explained this before, but in Thorellan culture, being rejected after a successful bonding initiation is considered a mark of biological inadequacy. What does that mean exactly? It means I would be expelled from the research community, she said matter-of-factly. No Thorellan male would ever consider bonding with a female who had been rejected by another species. I would essentially become a scientific pariah. Jax stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. Our bonding rituals are tied directly to our professional and social standing. A rejection would mean the end of my career, my social connections, and any possibility of future romantic partnerships. The weight of that revelation settled over Jax like a lead blanket. So if I ask for a dissolution, I basically destroy your entire life. Yes, Serana said simply, but I don't want to force you into a bond you didn't consciously choose. That would be unethical. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle hum of the ship's life support systems and the distant noise of Port Calexis outside. What would this consummation process actually involve? Jax asked finally. Biochemical integration through extended neural interface, Serana explained. Similar to what we began in the laboratory, but deeper and more sustained. The process creates permanent biochemical compatibility between bonded pairs. And the slurping thing, that's just how the neural interface feels to species that aren't accustomed to direct consciousness sharing, she said. It's actually quite pleasant once you adjust to the sensation. Jax looked at her, sitting there, beautiful and alien, and clearly trying to give him an out, even though it would cost her everything. What if we tried again, he said suddenly, but slower this time, with better communication. Serana's head snapped up, and the device on her temple brightened considerably. You would be willing to attempt the bonding process again? I'd be willing to try, Jax corrected. No commitments beyond seeing what actually happens when I don't panic and run away? That would be acceptable, Serana said, though her tone suggested it would be considerably more than acceptable. But we do this properly, Jax continued. You explain what's happening as it happens. And if I say stop, we stop, no matter what your biology is telling you. Agreed, Serana said immediately. Though I should warn you, the human nervous system appears to be unusually responsive to our bonding protocols. The sensation may be quite intense. I think I can handle intense, Jax said with considerably more confidence than he actually felt. Serana stood and moved closer, and Jax could smell that ozone and flower scent again stronger now. The process begins with simple contact, she explained, extending her hand. Physical touch allows our nervous systems to recognize each other and begin the compatibility assessment. Jax reached out and took her hand, and immediately felt that same warm pressure he'd experienced in the laboratory. But this time, instead of panicking, he focused on the sensation itself. It was strange, definitely, but not unpleasant, like having his consciousness gently nudged by something vast and curious. The initial connection feels overwhelming because your nervous system is trying to process information. It doesn't have a framework for... Serana explained, her voice taking on a slightly dreamy quality. But as the interface stabilizes, it becomes much more comfortable. It feels like you're reading my mind, Jax said. In a sense, I am. The biochemical interface allows us to share emotional and sensory experiences, but I can only access what you're willing to share. As she spoke, Jax became aware of something extraordinary. He could feel Serana's emotions as clearly as his own. Her nervousness about the procedure, her excitement at his willingness to try again, and underneath it all, something that felt remarkably like genuine affection. You actually like me, he said, surprised. Of course I do, Serana replied. I chose you for this research specifically because I found you intriguing. Your psychological profile indicated someone who was adventurous, but cautious, strong, but not aggressive. And when I met you in person, I found myself hoping that compatibility testing would be successful. So this wasn't just scientific curiosity. It was scientific curiosity that turned into something considerably more personal, she admitted. I've been studying interspecies compatibility for 3 years, but I've never felt drawn to actually bonding with any of my research subjects before. The sensation of connection was growing stronger, and Jax realized that what he'd interpreted as terrifying suction was actually something much more intimate. It was like having another consciousness gently intertwining with his own, sharing thoughts and feelings in a way that was completely unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This is incredible, he breathed. And we're barely at the surface level, Serana said. Full bonding involves complete biochemical integration, shared memories, synchronized nervous systems, permanent emotional connection. Permanent Thorellan bonds last for life, she said. Once the integration is complete, we would be biochemically linked forever. You would always be able to sense my emotional state, and I yours. Distance becomes irrelevant. Time becomes irrelevant. We would be in a very real sense two halves of a single consciousness. Jax stared at her, feeling the warmth of the connection flowing between them, aware of her emotions and thoughts brushing against his own mind like gentle waves. That's terrifying, he said. Yes, Serana agreed. It's also wonderful. And as the biochemical interface deepened between them, Jax realized that he was no longer thinking about escape or dissolution or the complications of accidentally marrying an alien scientist. He was thinking about what it might be like to spend the rest of his life connected to someone who understood him on a level deeper than consciousness itself. Serana, he said quietly. Yes. I think I want to complete the bonding ceremony. The smile that spread across her face could have lit up half the galaxy. Just as Serana's smile was lighting up the cabin, and Jax was coming to terms with the idea that he might actually want to be biochemically bonded to an alien scientist for the rest of his life, the ship's communication system chimed with another incoming call. Tavik's face appeared on the screen looking unusually serious and carrying what appeared to be an official data pad. Jax, I hate to interrupt what I'm sure is a very intimate moment, he said, but I've got some information you both need to hear. Can it wait? Jax asked, not entirely wanting to break the connection he was sharing with Serana. Not really, Tavik replied. I've been digging through the legal codes and I found something important. There's still a way out of this if you want it. Serana's hand tightened slightly in Jax's, and he could feel a spike of anxiety through their biochemical connection. What kind of way out? Jax asked. According to Andros Planetary Marriage Code Section 12(7), when any marriage that hasn't been fully consummated can be dissolved within 72 hours of the initial bonding ceremony, Tavik explained. No questions asked, no legal complications, and no social stigma for either party. Consummated meaning what exactly? Jax asked, though he was pretty sure he knew the answer. Complete biochemical integration, Tavik said. The full bonding process that creates permanent neural linkage between the partners. As long as that hasn't happened yet, either one of you can file for dissolution and walk away clean. Jax felt Serana's emotions shift through their connection. Relief, sadness, and something that felt like resignation all mixed together. That's good news, she said quietly, though her emotional state suggested she felt anything but good about it. It means you can escape this situation without any consequences. Escape? Jax asked. You didn't choose this, Serana said gently, beginning to withdraw her hand from his. You were tricked into it by cultural misunderstandings and my failure to properly explain the implications of the research. You deserve the chance to make a real choice. Serana, what are you saying? I'm saying that I want to file for dissolution, she said, though the sadness flowing through their connection made it clear that it was the last thing she actually wanted. You're a good person, Jax. You don't deserve to be trapped in a marriage you never wanted, just because I was too excited about my research to consider the ethical implications. Jax stared at her, feeling the genuine care and concern in her emotions, the way she was willing to sacrifice her own career and social standing just to give him his freedom back. And what happens to you if we dissolve the marriage? He asked. I'll figure something out, she said, but he could feel through their connection that she had no idea what that might be. Maybe I can find work on a frontier planet somewhere. Start over. Start. Your research, your career. Gone, she admitted, but that's not your responsibility. Tavik, who had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, cleared his throat. Look, I don't want to interfere in whatever decision you two make, but I should point out that you don't have to decide right now. You've got 72 hours to think about it. No, Serana said firmly. The longer we wait, the harder it will be. The biochemical connection deepens with every hour of contact. If we're going to dissolve this bond, we should do it now, before either of us becomes too attached. Too attached, Jax repeated. The bonding process creates genuine emotional attachment. she explained. The longer we remain connected, the more difficult it becomes to imagine life without that connection. Hey, it's one of the reasons why Thorellan marriages are so stable. But it also means that waiting could compromise your ability to make a clear-headed decision. Jax looked at her, this brilliant, beautiful alien scientist, who was willing to destroy her own life to give him a choice he never knew he needed to make. He could feel her emotions through their connection, the way she was trying to shield him from her own pain, her determination to do what she thought was right, even though it was breaking her heart. "Serana," he said quietly. "Yes. What if I don't want to dissolve the marriage?" Her eyes widened, and he felt a surge of hope through their connection that she immediately tried to suppress. "You don't have to say that to spare my feelings," she said. "I know this situation is complicated and unfair to you." "It's not about sparing your feelings," Jax said. "It's about the fact that in the last hour I've experienced something I never knew was possible. This connection, we have this ability to share thoughts and emotions. It's incredible. And you're incredible. But you didn't choose it," she protested. "Maybe I'm choosing it now," Jax said. "Maybe I'm tired of running away from things that scare me just because they're different or intense or complicated." He stood up, still maintaining the biochemical connection between them, and looked directly into her galaxy-deep eyes. "Serana, I've spent my entire adult life avoiding commitment, avoiding anything that might tie me down or complicate my nice, simple existence, hauling cargo through space. And you know what? I've been miserable. Not desperately miserable, but just empty. Going through the motions. Jax." "But this," he said, gesturing to the connection between them, "this feels like the first real thing that's happened to me in years. You feel like the first real thing. And yeah, it's terrifying, and yeah, it's probably crazy, but maybe that's exactly what I need." Serana's emotional state was shifting rapidly between hope, disbelief, and something that felt like joy, trying to break through layers of protective caution. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Full bonding is irreversible. Once we complete the integration, we'll be connected for life. There's no going back." "Maybe I'm not running this time," Jax said. Tavik, still watching from the communication screen, made a noise that sounded like a sigh. "Well, this is either the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed or the most catastrophically stupid decision in the history of interspecies relations." "Probably both," Jax said, not taking his eyes off Serana. "If we do this," Serana said slowly, "we do it properly. Complete biochemical integration, full neural bonding. Are you prepared for that level of connection?" "I think so," Jax said, "but I want you to walk me through it. No surprises this time." Serana nodded, and the device on her temple began pulsing with warm golden light. "The process takes approximately 6 hours for full integration. We'll need to maintain physical contact throughout, and the biochemical exchange will gradually deepen until our nervous systems achieve complete synchronization. And the slurping sensation, that only happens when the receiving nervous system resists the connection," she explained. "If you're open to the bond, it feels more like shared breathing, consciousness flowing back and forth like a gentle tide." "That sounds considerably less terrifying," Jax admitted. "It is. The initial interface was so intense because your fight or flight response was activated. But if you're genuinely accepting the bond, your nervous system will cooperate rather than resist." Jax took a deep breath, looked at Tavik's concerned face on the screen, then back at Serana. "Tavik, thanks for the legal research, but I think we're going to pass on the dissolution option." "Are you absolutely sure about this?" his friend asked. "No," Jax said honestly. "But I'm sure I want to find out what happens if I stop running away from things that might change my life." Tavik shook his head. "In that case, congratulations, and may whatever gods watch over crazy humans and love-struck aliens have mercy on both your souls." The communication screen went dark, leaving Jax and Serana alone in the cabin. "So," Jax said, "how do we do this properly?" "We begin with intention," Serana said, taking both of his hands in hers. "Full conscious acceptance of the bond and everything it entails." "I accept," Jax said, and meant it. "Then we let the biochemical integration deepen naturally without resistance or fear." As she spoke, Jax felt the connection between them shift and strengthen. Instead of the overwhelming suction sensation he'd experienced before, this felt like breathing in sync with someone like their consciousness were gently intertwining. "This is beautiful," he whispered. "This is just the beginning," Serana replied, and her voice seemed to come from inside his own mind as much as from her lips. For the next 6 hours, Jax experienced something beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible. Not just the physical intimacy of the bonding process, but the extraordinary sensation of two minds becoming one, two hearts beating in perfect synchronization, two consciousness merging into something larger and more complete than either could be alone. When it was over, when the biochemical integration was complete and permanent, Jax Bradley was no longer just a human cargo pilot, and Serana Vethiki was no longer just a Thorellan scientist. They were something new, something unprecedented in the history of interspecies relations. They were bonded. 2 weeks after the bonding ceremony that made interspecies history, Jax was discovering that being biochemically married to an alien scientist came with some unexpected perks and some very surprising challenges. The perks included never being lonely, always knowing exactly how Serana was feeling, and having access to the most brilliant scientific mind he'd ever encountered. The challenges included never being alone, always knowing exactly how Serana was feeling, and trying to keep up with conversations about biochemical engineering that made his head spin. But none of that prepared him for what Serana announced on a quiet Tuesday morning as they were having breakfast in their shared quarters at the research complex. "Jax," she said, setting down her cup of something that tasted like liquid starlight, "I have some news." Through their bond, he could feel her excitement mixed with nervousness, which immediately got his attention. "Good news or bad news?" he asked. "That depends on your perspective," she said, her skin taking on that luminescent quality it got when she was experiencing strong emotions. "The biochemical integration between our species has been even more successful than we anticipated." "Okay," Jack said slowly. "That sounds like good news." "We're going to have a child." Jax's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "We're what now?" "A hybrid offspring." Serana explained, her excitement bleeding through their connection despite her attempts to remain clinical. "The bonding process successfully merged our genetic material and initiated reproduction. I'm approximately 2 weeks into gestation." Jax stared at her, his brain trying to process this information. "Is that even possible? I mean, we're different species." "Apparently, it's more than possible," Serana said. "According to my preliminary scans, our child is developing with characteristics from both species. Enhanced nervous system from the Thorellan side, adaptive resilience from the human side. It's unprecedented." "A baby," Jax said weakly. "We're having a baby." "We're having the first human Thorellan hybrid in recorded history," Serana corrected. "This child is going to change everything we understand about interspecies compatibility." Through their bond, Jax could feel Serana's scientific fascination with the situation, but underneath that was something deeper. Pure joy and a fierce protective instinct that was surprisingly intense. "How do you feel about this?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Excited, overwhelmed. This child is going to grow up as the only one of its kind. It will face challenges neither of our species has ever had to deal with." "But you want this," Jax said, reading her emotions. "More than I've ever wanted anything," she said. "Do you?" Jax looked at his alien wife, felt the warmth of their connection, thought about the impossibility of their situation and the absolute rightness of it, and realized that the answer was surprisingly easy. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Over the following weeks, as Serana's pregnancy progressed, they discovered that having a hybrid child was going to be even more complicated than they'd anticipated. Not just medically, though that was challenging enough, but politically and socially as well. The Interspecies Relations Bureau wanted to study the child. 3 different universities wanted to offer research grants. The media wanted interviews. And several diplomatic delegations wanted to know what this meant for future human-Thorellan relations. But the most surprising development came during Serana's 3rd week of pregnancy, when she called Jax into her laboratory with an expression of barely contained excitement. "You need to hear this," she said, gesturing to a complex piece of monitoring equipment that was apparently designed to track fetal development. "Hear what?" Jax asked. "The baby's first attempts at biochemical communication," she said, activating the device. What came through the speakers was a sound that made Jax's blood run cold with recognition. Slurping. Not the overwhelming, terrifying suction he'd experienced during their first bonding attempt, but definitely the same basic sound. Gentle, rhythmic, almost musical. "Oh my God," Jax said. "Is it trying to bond with us? With me specifically?" Serana said, her hand moving to her abdomen. Thorellan children begin practicing biochemical interface techniques in utero, but this is the first time we've ever recorded a hybrid attempting the process. So our kid is already showing signs of Thorellan bonding abilities? Enhanced Thorellan bonding abilities. Serana corrected. "The neural patterns are more complex than anything I've seen in pure Thorellan development. Your species' neural plasticity seems to be amplifying our natural bonding capabilities." They listened to the soft, rhythmic slurping sounds coming from the monitoring equipment, and Jax felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. "This kid is going to be something special, isn't it?" he said. "This kid is going to revolutionize everything we understand about consciousness connection and the possibilities of interspecies cooperation." Serana replied, "But yes, also something very special." 6 months later, Jax found himself standing in the offices of the Interspecies Relations Bureau, holding a datapad filled with forms he never could have imagined needing to fill out. "Application for recognition of hybrid family unit," he read aloud. "Genetic compatibility certification. Request for diplomatic immunity status for minor child of unprecedented species combination." Serana, now visibly pregnant and glowing with both biochemical bonding energy and maternal happiness, was reviewing her own set of documents. "Educational planning for unique physiological development." She read, "Medical care protocols for hybrid physiology. Cultural integration guidelines for multi-species households." "You know," Jax said, looking around the waiting room filled with diplomatic officials from dozens of different species, all of whom seemed to be staring at them with expressions ranging from fascination to barely concealed panic. "When I agreed to that biochemical compatibility test, I thought the worst thing that could happen was that I'd have an embarrassing story to tell at parties. And instead, you accidentally became the first human to marry a Thorellan father, the first human-Thorellan hybrid, and potentially change the course of interspecies relations for the next 1,000 years." Serana said. "Yeah," Jax said, taking her hand and feeling the warm pulse of their permanent bond. "Exactly." From inside Serana's womb, they could both feel a gentle sensation that had become familiar over the past months. Their child practicing its bonding techniques, reaching out through its mother's biochemical interface to touch the minds of its parents. "I love you both," Jax said, addressing both his wife and the impossible child they'd created together. And through the bond they shared through the biochemical connection that had started with a terrifying slurping sensation and evolved into something deeper and more beautiful than either of them had ever imagined possible. He felt their love flowing back to him. The future was going to be complicated. Their child was going to face challenges no one had ever faced before. There would be diplomatic incidents, scientific controversies, and probably more paperwork than any reasonable person should have to deal with. But as they sat in that waiting room surrounded by aliens trying to figure out what their family meant for the future of the galaxy, Jax realized that he wouldn't change a single thing about the chain of events that had led them here. Sometimes the best things in life happen when you stop running away and start running towards something that terrifies and amazes you in equal measure. Even if it does involve biochemical suction and accidentally getting married to an alien scientist. Especially if it involves that. And that's how Jax Bradley went from a simple cargo pilot to the father of the first human-alien hybrid in galactic history, all because he couldn't handle a little biochemical suction. If you enjoyed this wild ride through interspecies romance and accidental marriage, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got more incredible HFY stories coming your way featuring humans doing what we do best, stumbling into extraordinary situations and somehow making them work. Got a favorite moment from Jax and Serana's story? Drop it in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear about the most awkward first date in the galaxy, share this video with them. Until next time, keep exploring the stars and remember, sometimes the best adventures start with running away from something that turns out to be exactly what you needed. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.